We're here today at the South Windsor Recovery Centre. I'm joined by the SES Commissioner Carlene York, Head of Resilience New South Wales, Commissioner Shane Fitzsimmons, as well as local members Robyn Preston, Kevin Connolly, and the Mayor of Hawkesbury, Pat Connolly. So obviously it's been a significant focus in the Northern Rivers area and the devastation and the tragedy that's unfolded up here. But as we know, it's been right across our state, and particularly for the Hawkesbury. It was only 12 months ago to the date that we were up here and seeing devastating floods through the Hawkesbury region. And whilst it's an area that's obviously very flood prone, there's been many stories of, once again, heroism and bravery of many people putting their lives on the line to provide support and care to help people get through it. And despite the difficulties that our state has faced, despite the overwhelming task that stands ahead of us as a state, as a people, to me what has stood out more than anything else over this period of time is the strength, the values, the courage, the bravery of every single person across our state who has lent their support to help get people through. And it's not just the people of New South Wales as well, it's people that have come from around the country. And the time up in the Northern Rivers and here today, many stories of people from SES and RFS volunteers right around the country coming into New South Wales to help out their fellow Australians. And I think that spirit is what makes our country great, and it's something that we should embrace in these times of adversity, to realise that those values are something that we all have a stake in, and to see it on show right across the country, because it also provides, shows us the importance of making sure that we continue to pass those values on to generations to come. So right across the state, here we are in the Recovery Centre in South Windsor. There's 8 of these set up across New South Wales, and from my experience, they're going incredibly well. And the feedback on the ground from not just community groups, but councils and many impacted people has certainly instilled me with confidence that this is certainly the way to go going forward, and the ability of getting all of these government services from a federal level, state and council level all in one place, providing that support to people who need it, whether that's in financial assistance through Services Australia and Service New South Wales, housing. We currently have 1,500 people in housing. Just met with Bruce and Steve, who are from Windsor, currently staying down the road in temporary accommodation. We announced our accommodation package recently, and we want to do whatever we can to get as many people into housing as quickly as possible. It is a mammoth challenge. We have 1,500 people currently in temporary accommodation. In addition to that, right across the state, we have people still in our evacuation centres, and we also know there'll be many people across the state staying with family and friends at this time. So whilst the task is significant, we are going to put everything into it. There'll be having people going back to their houses, going back home. We don't want them to just go back to a house. We want them to go back to a home. So the cleanup is well underway, not just here in Hawkesbury, but also in the Northern Rivers. Around 4,000 tonnes of debris a day is being collected. There are around 100 trucks on the ground providing that support. I want to thank the councils who are working very closely with. This is a multi-layered operation, and I think it's incredibly important that those 3 key immediate areas that I've identified, getting the cleanup completed, getting people into homes, and getting financial assistance out the door. So we're working tirelessly to achieve that. I want to thank particularly our volunteers, the SES and RFS, who have done a phenomenal job during this period of time. It has been a significant task at hand from the north all the way to the south, and from behalf of every single person across our state, can I thank you. We have a system here when it comes to emergency services. When we have natural disasters, it's our volunteers who we rely on. And can I just thank everybody for that, and also not just the uniformed volunteers, those who aren't uniformed. Everyone went out of their way, whether it was in Hawkesbury or in the Northern Rivers, to provide that support, put their life on the line to look after their mates and their strangers. And can I just thank everybody for the work that they have done there. Currently, we have still 23 evacuation orders in place across the state. that affects 3,470 people, and we have 8 evacuation warnings still in place, affecting 1,415 people. So my key message today in relation to those who are affected by those orders and warnings, please continue to follow the instructions of the SES. Please do not be complacent. This flood event is not over. Even here in the Hawkesbury, we still have many isolated communities. So if there is an evacuation order in place, please follow those instructions and leave. If an evacuation warning is in place, please get ready to leave. As I said, this event is not over. We still need to follow those instructions. Following the advice from the SES ensures we'll all get through this safely. Today, we're also announcing $25 million in mental health support. And a lot of this will be targeted to where the need is, but where our community groups across the state inform us of where that funding should be supported. It's very clear to me from the time that I've spent in evacuation centres that more needs to be done, not just in the short term, but for the months and years ahead. And this funding will be targeted to provide initial support in our evacuation centres, in our recovery centres, even here today at South Windsor. I think there's more we can do to provide additional services and support here. This has been, for many people, an incredibly distressing and traumatic time, and I appreciate that, but that's not just going to be in the short term. This will also be a need in the months and years ahead, and this additional funding of $25 million, I believe, will ensure that we don't just focus on the here and now, but that care and that support will be there now and into the future. And my message is we will get through it. And I know for many people, this event, this destruction can be overwhelming, but we will be there side by side with you every step of the way. We will get through this. We will get the housing, we will get the cleanup completed, and we will get every single community and every single person back on their feet as quickly as possible. Finally, I just want to make a brief comment before I pass to Commissioner York in relation to COVID, and once again continue to stress to people across our state, as we've always said, we focus on learning to live alongside the virus. We've said that we've said that now for the last 2 years. The crucial part of that is being vaccinated and getting a booster shot. We have our booster shot here in New South Wales, around 60% of the eligible population. If it's been 3 months since your second shot vaccination, please go and get that booster shot. If it's been 4 to 6 weeks since you've had COVID, please go and get that booster shot. It's still available in all our centres across the state through your GP and your pharmacy. Now is not the time to be complacent. Please continue to make those efforts. If you look where we sit today in Australia compared to anywhere else in the world, when it comes to the death rate, ICU and hospitalisation, the evidence is clear. Booster shots work. Please continue to make that effort. I thank everybody who has done that. And if I particularly look at the last few days, and speaking to the Health Minister this morning, it's very pleasing to see we're having an uptake in that rate. But can I just please continue to urge people, our success of the past will be our success in the future, and that means the best way to protect you, your friends and your family is to get that booster shot, so please do so. I'm now going to pass to Commissioner York, who will give the State Emergency Service update. Then I'll pass to the Head of Resilience New South Wales, Commissioner Fitzsimmons, who'll provide an update in relation to the recovery that is well underway at our 8 centres across the state. And then I might get Pat Connolly, the local mayor, to give a bit of a update in terms of the Hawkesbury Nepean region, what they've gone through, and how the recovery is underway here in the Hawkesbury region. And then we'll take your questions.
Thank you. So can I just remind the community, as the Premier said, this event has not finished yet, and there still are some communities isolated and at risk from our floodwaters. The Bureau of Meteorology have forecast some finer weather over the next few days, which is well appreciated and gives time for our communities that have been affected by this event to get into their homes and start recovering from this event. As the Premier said, we've had 24,500 requests for assistance and over 2,070 in the last 24 hours. We've also had 3 flood rescues in the last 24 hours, so still shows that the risk is out there in the community. The New South Wales SES has not only been handing over to recovery in the Northern Rivers, but we also, when we report on our request for assistance, we're also going out there helping those homes that have been inundated, had roof damage, trees down, power lines cut, so we're assisting the community on a number of different fronts. This severe weather event has been one of the worst that we've ever had on record in various parts of New South Wales, and the SES has been operationally active from the Queensland border to the Victorian border, as well as helping the communities out in the Western Zone from their recent flooding, and we're now seeing the waters from Queensland coming through and some severe weather warnings and flood warnings for the area around the Queensland border, around Mungandai. So we are still out there assisting the community. We've also got many volunteers out there in resupply, because we have a large number of communities still isolated and individual homes that they need our assistance as well. But it's not the only the SES, which is made up of 10,500 wonderful volunteers, but we also have Rural Fire Service, Fire and Rescue, Marine Rescue, Surf Life Saving. So the community volunteer in various ways, and for such a large event we call on those agencies to assist us in responding to the community, in saving those lives, and also keeping them going in resupply, as well as our government agencies such as Fire and Rescue, Ambulance, and another volunteer agency of St John's Ambulance. We have all been active on the ground. And I remind the community that our organisation is made up of their community members, their family, their friends who live in that area and understand what dangers these weather events bring into those communities. But we're still not over the major hurdle. We are still in an event where we have the storm season continuing till the end of at least March, and then we head into winter. So the Bureau's forecast for these seasons are continuing wet weather. So I ask the communities to always remain alert, listen to the orders and evacuation warnings and information that we put out, not only from the SES but also from the Bureau, to assist them to get ready. I must praise the community around the Hawkesbury Nepean Valley as well. They went through this just last year with maximum record levels, and this year it has gone higher than some of those levels recorded. And I've been out there today having a look at some of the damage of this water. But the community, they listened to the warnings, they got ready. They've obviously done some recovery from last year to make sure that they're more resilient in some of these areas, and they've been really good about following the directions of the New South Wales SES. So just to finish, I would like to remind the community that we are out there helping you, handing over to recovery in a number of areas, particularly the Mid-North Coast, the Hunter Valley and Newcastle areas, the Hawkesbury Nepean metropolitan areas, as well as the Illawarra, where there has been some damage and roads cut, particularly in the Kangaroo Valley area, so there's resupply there as well. So be aware of your risk. Take the time whilst the weather is fine to try and start that clean out and recovery, and listen to the instructions that we give out for any future events where there could be the possibility at any time of severe thunderstorms. Thank you.
Thank you, Premier. As indicated, the recovery effort is certainly commencing in earnest in a number of areas, particularly up in the northeast, where the relief around clean-up and washout continues of significant scale in response to the scale and magnitude of the unprecedented flooding events up in northeast New South Wales. As the Premier indicated, about 4,000 tonnes a day of waste is being removed from the streets, from people's properties, into temporary transfer waste stations. The movements are averaging about a truck per minute into those waste stations, and to give some signal about the scale and magnitude and the workforce that's the workloads that are occurring up there, in 4 days we've moved more waste than we did in 4 weeks with the Mid-North Coast record floods only 12 months ago. So extraordinary work continues, but there's an extraordinary amount of work still ahead just with that relief and clean-up. We've got the 8 recovery centres right across the state, 7 up north and 1 down here in South Windsor where we are today. There'll be others that will continue to open up over the days and weeks ahead in consultation with local councils and local communities on where the need is and where the priorities are. And again, having that range of services and supports available to people who need them is critically important. Whilst the focus has been on the northeast, so too has our focus been on other parts of New South Wales, including the Hawkesbury Nepean. And as the waters are receding, we're seeing the clean-up crews, again, the composition of ADF, Fire and Rescue New South Wales, Rural Fire Service, and of course our contractors through Public Works and Environment. That's occurring in earnest as well as the waters recede, and it's difficult to fathom that only 12 months ago we were standing here dealing with very similar extraordinary flood operations impacting communities along the Hawkesbury Nepean. So we really feel for the people all across these flood-affected areas, but in particular those that are only just starting to rebuild and doing it all over again in places like the Hawkesbury Nepean here. So far, the damage assessments are being undertaken and coordinated through the SES. Are close to 15,000 properties that have been assessed. More than half of those, over 8,000, have been identified as having damage, and we know that about 25% of all the properties are uninhabitable. So we're talking about a significant number of people being displaced, a significant scale and effort of recovery and rebuilding that will be needed, not just to homes, not just to properties, but to businesses and townships right across different parts of the state. So far, as the Premier said, we've got 1,000 people currently in emergency accommodation. And over a week, since a week started or thereabouts, we've had more than 2,000 people being afforded emergency accommodation, and obviously some have moved on to more shorter, medium term. That is clearly going to be one of our most significant challenges, which is why we've established under the State Recovery Committee a task force to look at housing and rebuilding, reporting back through the Minister and to the Crisis Policy Committee to look at the necessary multifaceted approach to what's needed, not just to address the immediacy of here and now, but how that can be done so that we're more resilient and better prepared into the future in a lot of these areas. A significant work will continue, and we need people to stay with us while we focus on recovery and we talk about rebuilding, we talk about repair. The announcement today of the significant investment into psychological first aid, into mental health and well-being, into counselling services is critical, because a big aspect to recovery is about healing, and the compounding consecutive effects of so many disasters and displacement over the last couple of years is having an enormous toll on people that we meet with and we connect with right across these disaster-prone areas. As we're seeing it here in the Recovery Centre, we'll see that work continue for many weeks and many months, and indeed years ahead, with the enormity of the challenge. Thank you.
Thank you. First, I'd just like to thank the Premier for coming out here today. It's good to have an opportunity to show the Premier what we're dealing with on the ground and have a chance to talk to him about the support that we need. So right now, waters are receding in the Hawkesbury, but we still have many properties that are isolated, both either due to floodwater or due to the impact on local roads. There's significant damage to our local road network that is going to leave some people isolated potentially for some days to come. We also have just under 2,000 properties that do not have power still, and so that's the situation at the moment. I believe we've completed just under 1,000 rapid assessments being completed by the local SES and RFS. Those rapid assessments so far have found in the Hawkesbury just under 50 houses that are uninhabitable, but of course we're starting with the properties we can get to first, which are unlikely to be the ones worst affected. So this is likely to get worse as we keep going, and we should get access to more and more properties over the coming days. The message that I've got for the people of the Hawkesbury is that we need to work together on this. There's going to be significant damage. We've just been through this 12 months ago, so we do as a community know what to expect, but unfortunately the initial assessment has seen very significant damage to our local roads, landslips in roads along the edges of the river, significant damage to our riverbanks, and that's going to be a long-term recovery. We need to work together and be patient on that. And I'd also be saying to people that we do have this recovery centre here in South Windsor. It's got over 15 different services here, so you can come and get everything you need in terms of getting your recovery started. We're also going to open up a recovery centre in Wiseman's Ferry as soon as we can get safe access to that. So we're all here at Council and at these recovery centres working with you, and as a community we will get through this again. Thanks.
What questions? Can I just something that that's really struck me during this last couple of weeks has been this sense with people who have been substantially affected, their homes have been devastated, that the constant message from people is there are people who are worse off than I am. And that's a wonderful thing, but I want everyone to know that we will be with you through this whole situation as we recover. And, you know, I know for many people in the Hawkesbury, this is a worse flood event than last year. They're hearing stories of many people who were not substantially affected last time or slightly, now severely impacted. And because of the situation in the Northern Rivers and the mass devastation that's occurred up there, I don't want anyone to feel that if you live in the Hawkesbury or you've been in an area that hasn't been as substantially affected as up north, that doesn't mean the government support is not going to be there. And I'm certainly going to focus here at our state level as we roll out the packages that we will ensure that it's not based on your LGA. We will make sure if you have been affected, you're given that support that you need to get through. And as I say, whilst it's a wonderful and beautiful thing that people across our state are saying, well, look at other people, they're in a more dire position and predicament than I am in, that does not mean that we do not believe that your situation does not need the support that we can provide.
Premier, you come here today, and no doubt Commissioner York is coming today expecting questions on helicopters and the ADF, so I want to start on that, please.
Yeah.
How can it be possible that some 28 to 30 helicopters capable of winching and providing relief, support, transport, etc., can be grounded idle, many of which are contracted to the government specifically these times, and yet are grounded or sent to Cooma or sent to Wollongong away from Lismore? How is that even possible?
What I might do, Robert, is I might have the Commissioner speak on the operational matter and then I'll provide some further commentary.
Okay.
Yeah, so in preparing for any event like this, we try and pre-position as many resources as we can, because we know, and have seen it through this event in many parts of New South Wales, the roads are cut and access is limited. During this event, we had storm warnings and severe flooding warnings out for the entire east coast of New South Wales, and so we had to pre-position our resources in different areas. I think it's good news to think that some of them on the south coast in Illawarra did not get used as much as we had anticipated. It was a fast-moving event. Things were changing on the hour. We were taking our advice from the Bureau of Meteorology and placing our resources where we thought they would most be needed. And we did place resources in the Northern Rivers district in preparation for what was forecast.
Many helicopter companies didn't even receive a phone call. I understand things are happening thick and fast, but when rescues are the highest priority at the height of the floods and people are trapped either in attics or on rooftops, is getting aerial support to that specific dire area not the highest priority? And why were some 30 helicopters just overlooked?
I'm not sure of the numbers in relation to the call out, but I know that what happened, particularly in the Northern Rivers, the significant storm that came through, the worst part of that storm was at night. We are quite restricted in what we can put into the air at night, and quite restricted in relation to the activity when there is a storm and the weather is unsafe to get up into the air, and we were hindered by the weather effects in that area.
But come 6 o'clock in the morning on February 28, Lismore started evacuations. It's heading towards 14 metres, and there are companies based here in Sydney that would take 90 minutes to get to Lismore that were sent to Cooma.
Well, as I said, we still had flood warnings out for the entirety of this state, and the Cooma resources would have been needed for the Southern Highlands and the South Coast, which was still at risk in relation to minor flooding, and that did not risk for a number of days.
Would you accept, sorry, that's just the last one, would you accept that helicopter companies that could have helped didn't even receive a phone call? And if that's the case, is that acceptable to you?
I'm not sure of what helicopter agencies you're talking about. It is quite a rigid process to make sure they're assessed and accredited in relation to flood rescue. It's a very, very dangerous type of rescue, and we've seen the difficulties even the experienced ADF helicopters had in a number of those locations to get to people. But we did have obviously more vessels in the areas at risk as well, and so wherever possible we'll use aviation assets. Wherever possible we'll get the vessels out as quickly as we can.
Just in terms specifically with the ADF, did the ADF approach you, the SES, in the lead up to last Sunday and say we've got some choppers that we can give you, and the SES said no?
We are in constant contact with all of our agencies as well as ADF in preparation for any event. The date I think in question that was stated as the date that we spoke to the ADF was the 25th of February, and at that stage the forecast that we were relying on was that we are expecting northern rivers to be in minor to moderate flood levels, much less than what we had last year, and we resourced appropriately on those levels. Now history would tell us, when we look back in hindsight, those flood levels went past the maximum flood level and went to almost 14.4 metres, which is 2 metres above anything we have ever experienced in that area. And I would say if you look at the weather over the last 2 years, just 2 years ago we were in bushfires, coming out of about 8 years of drought, and we've had intense rain. And so the movement of waters and the path of the rivers and floodwaters is quite different when the ground is saturated, and we had record levels that we had never experienced before. So we rely on our local experience. We have many volunteers up there with years of experience that had not seen flood levels at this level, but also the added risk and effect of dams being at very high levels and the ground being saturated, which becomes very difficult for the waters to soak in.
Premier, obviously somebody's trying to make it very clear that this was a state stuff-up in terms of not getting the ADF choppers down. Do you take responsibility that perhaps, yes, in hindsight, that you should have taken more help from the ADF?
Well, I think what's important from my perspective as Premier is that we get all the information and make an assessment of what went well, what could be done better, were there mistakes made, and that's why I think the better way of doing that is through a proper review of what occurred. As the Commissioner has said, and I recall being with her very early on prior to the flood event becoming substantive, and we were down in Wollongong with the Bureau, and there was significant concern for the South Coast. So there's clearly an issue in terms of we need to be making sure that resources are available to those communities that need them, and we'll always assess and reflect and have an honest appraisal of what could have been done better in the circumstance. There's no doubt that this event was not predicted. It was not predicted. That was not what the Bureau was saying. But ultimately as well, from my perspective, I don't want to have anybody in our state feel that they were isolated or abandoned. And we will look through that. And I think that there are many lessons that come from it. But unless you actually do that honest assessment, you're not going to put yourself in a position where you can actually act and make changes. And I think there's certainly time now to do a proper review as we move through and make the changes that are necessary. But I do want to make the point that our SES, RFS and all those teams have done an amazing job through this. I don't want there to be any sense that there were failures in that spot. And being with the Commissioner during that period of time, they have to make the assessments based on the evidence and information that's in front of them. And when we were looking at a statewide issue, the allocation of resources needs to be up front in those areas where damage and devastation could occur. So we'll work through it, we'll have a look at it, and as I said, properly, in a thought-through way, and any changes that need to be made. And I'll be completely honest, like when we do those assessments, I want honest feedback. I want to have a real look at where could things be better. And that may not, you can sit there and ask on response. It could also, what's really struck me from the time that I've been up north as well is just coordination in terms of communities and understanding before the government comes in, where are the areas, where are the evacuation centres, where will the recovery centres be, who's just giving that greater guidance to the community. Clearly what's been an issue has always been telecommunications. I mean, when you've had telecommunications down, it's very hard for coordination. I think substantial investments can have to be made there.
Commissioner Neal, do you think it's unfair that at the the time of the advice, with waters predicted to be moderate, 7.2, literally half of what eventually came. Is it unfair in hindsight to judge the SES response at that time when a 7.2 metre flood would not require the ADF?
I think it is unfair. I mean, our SES volunteers and all the other agencies that assist us have been putting their lives on the line every day to get out there and help the community. They do a lot of planning before any event. As said, we've got a good emergency management framework that we make decisions ready to enact when we go operational. They do a lot of planning, operational response at the time, because things do change and we do expect water to go in different ways. So we are prepared to plan and escalate as necessary. And they are, as I said before, community members that have put their hand up without payment to risk their lives to help the community. And they train, when we don't have the events, they train, they're skilled. We've got great equipment now. It's improved over the years, and you know, this event was better than the last event, and the next event will be better again.
Can I ask your honest appraisal? I mean, you've come from the New South Wales Police Force, which can be bureaucratic at the best of times, to the SES, which can be bureaucratic at the best of times. Is there too much red tape for you in an event which requires immediacy to have to machete your way through to get a result? Are there too many layers of decision makers? Too much bureaucracy, too much red tape to be effective, and should that be the focus of any examination going forward?
So I can't talk for the bushfires, but I know in the last event it was more difficult to get ADF resources, and we've worked very much with the Commonwealth about trying to get rid of that red tape. We need to be a fast-moving, responsive, professional organisation that I think the SES are. And I think we can always improve on it, and it would be good to have a look at those circumstances as well in any review.
Premier, why did it take so long to get the ADF on the ground afterwards? Like, you know, Minister Cook stood up last Saturday and said that you've asked for the whole 5,000. Like, where were they day 2, 3, 4? You know, that was day 7.
Okay, so I just want to make a couple of points. I'll get to that. Just on the back of what the Commissioner has said, that somehow, which I think has been lost over the course of the week, and that is that when it comes to natural disasters in this state, we rely on our volunteers. That is one of the wonderful things about Australia, in the sense that when we have these disasters, we have a volunteer network who do an amazing job. And when you have a situation, as the Commissioner has said, where such an extreme event has occurred that was not predicted, that was not forecast, then in those circumstances where those volunteer resources may not be at the level they need to be, what we see is people looking after each other, people who aren't registered volunteers going out, conducting rescues, providing care and support. That shouldn't be seen as a negative. That should be seen as a positive that I believe has been lost in the media over the course of the last 2 weeks. And it's sad from my perspective, because from what I've seen over the last 2 weeks has been an incredible spirit in our people of coming together, of putting their life on the line to provide that support, to get people to safety, to coming together and setting up their own community hubs, making sure that every single member of the community has been looked after. That period of time before the floods subsisted and government support could get in, it is an absolutely wonderful thing that should be cherished and embraced by our state, of what occurred in particularly in the Northern Rivers during this period of time. And I think that's unfortunately been lost. In relation to
but aside from that, it was very much on the ground in Lismore by Thursday, Friday.
Yeah.
Everybody was going, where's the army? Where's the help to clean up?
So the DAC request went in on the 28th, and there were, from my understanding, troops on the ground on the 27th. Now, and I might get Commissioner Fitzsimmons to provide some further information here, but when the state puts a DAC request in, that's for as much support as we need. Now, you've got troops, and this is probably a better question to the federal government, and I will certainly look at this through the review. This will form part of the review that takes place. I mean, I think the question, Robert's question to the Commissioner, is a good one in terms of where is the red tape, and bureaucratic processes that when you have a catastrophic event that potentially get in the way of getting resources to where they're meant to be as quickly as possible, we should look at that. There's now...
By the Monday, like the Monday after, a full week after, there were only 275 personnel on the ground in northern New South Wales. Is that good enough?
But that's a question directed to the AD.
But in your mind, it's your state, you put in the request.
Well, I would prefer to have as many troops on the ground as quickly as possible where the need is, clearly. And we'll work with the Commonwealth. But I don't want this to turn into New South Wales government at war with the Commonwealth. Where there are issues, I want them to be addressed, and we will address them. But at the moment, getting that understanding around when you've got a massive flood event or a massive fire event, you've got troops available all around the country, well, you've got to make sure that those requests from the ADF, from the Commonwealth perspective, they're getting troops to where they needed to go. Now, that would be complicated. I'm assuming that would be a complicated task. In these circumstances, from what I saw on the ground, that would be a complicated task. But as part of the review that we will do, that will be included. Because if there is an issue in terms of communication or being able to get deployment on the ground because of red tape and bureaucratic processes, well, they need to be removed. Now, I don't have the answers to that yet because we've got to go through that process and review it. But, you know, the Commission's already made comments in relation to some of that, and we will address it.
There's been a lot of commentary around perhaps there should be, you know, a team that's deployed from the ADF, like ready to go in these. Do you think that they're... Well,
I think that's something that should certainly be looked at, because this is not in many respects ADF core business, right? But what's very pleasing, and meeting so many of the members of the ADF and many reservists as well, just being passionate about being on the ground and helping local communities has been outstanding. But it's something that we should look at, and I don't think that's not a negative. That's, you know, let's use this to make sure that next time an event happens, which almost certainly will happen, that there's better processes in place. But ultimately now, as Premier, I don't have that information in front of me, but I will get that information through this process. I want an honest review in respect of what could have happened, what could have been better, how could the response have been better, and we will look at it. But let's also not lose sight of it, that the event that occurred in the Northern Rivers was not predicted, it was not forecast. What was forecast was statewide. We were talking about the South Coast, which, you know, it was a blessing that the South Coast did not have the damage that we actually believe was going to occur. So there are always going to be challenges with coordination, but it's not about having, this is not about excuses. This is about getting the right information, having an honest appraisal, getting the facts, looking at it properly and putting proposals forward about how we can do things better in the future.
Premier, I wanted to say, sorry.
No, right.
You go.
it's on a different topic.
Well, then you be quiet while I ask my question. Thank you. Premier, I've noticed there's a consistency in a lot of your media conferences about talking about what the media is, what is lost in the media, and the media focusing on certain things. I'd suggest to you that there's been wall-to-wall coverage of the Australian spirit and people helping each other, but there has also been wall-to-wall coverage of people saying the government has let us down.
Yeah.
We deserve better. The response was too slow. The response continues to be substandard. Surely you would expect us to ruthlessly
for sure.
the decision-making processes of the government.
Absolutely. I'm not saying, sorry, Rob, that's the impression. That's certainly not what I'm saying. I think that's incredibly important. That's incredibly important, because without an honest assessment of where things could have been better, then you can't have faith in things improving into the future.
Should that be a parliamentary inquiry? I think what I'll set up will be what I believe is the best approach to get the best outcomes moving forward. So I don't want to preempt that, Robert, because to me it's getting the right people to have a look at it, that I have faith that we'll get the right answers. So I don't want to preempt what forum that will take.
Commissioner, if I could ask you a question. You keep talking about how it wasn't forecast how severe it would be up in Lismore. Did did you speak to people on the ground about how bad it actually got, and why did you send resources who were sitting at Cooma for doing nothing, just waiting on standby? I understand that there was an issue situation down the South Coast, but why didn't you divert them and bring them up to Lismore? They were receiving phone calls, the helicopter companies were receiving phone calls from people on the ground asking for their help, but they couldn't move because they're contracted to you.
Well, we put extra resources up there. We had to cover off a large number of warnings across the state, as I've already said. So we then reached out not only to the ADF but other states as well. So we got technicians, incident management controllers in from Western Australia, South Australia, ACT, Victoria and Tasmania. So we brought a lot of resources in to assist us, to help us in this event. And I can't respond or prepare for an event that hasn't been forecasted. But even taking it at its highest, it then, as I said, in the Northern Rivers went 2 metres above what was forecast. And the areas that were affected were, some of the houses were worse affected than in the last floods, and the area was larger as well. So we brought in the resources. I also have to remember that the community needs not to be affected. So if you're talking about bringing in ADF, they are people too, and they need somewhere to sleep at night. They need food. They need clean, dry clothes to go out every day in these dangerous situations and start cleaning up the communities. So the ADF brings with them resources that allow them to build base camps, just like the Rural Fire Service has done for themselves and fire and rescue, so that they can be safe as well and be ready and operationally prepared to go out and help the community.
Just for the Premier,
Yep.
On another topic, has there been any more progress on the Shane Warne Memorial for Sydney? Do we have any idea who might be coming?
Well, we're working through that with the trust, and we want to run those events alongside each other. We'll obviously live stream the memorial service from the MCG, and I think that's incredibly important that people, Shane Warne, probably the greatest cricketer I've ever seen, and I think of a generation, and well loved by people in New South Wales, even though he was a Victorian. And I think it's important that we provide the opportunity for people to come to the cricket ground and pay their respects to Shane and to his family and to his friends. But we're working through that at the moment through Tony Shepherd and the team at the cricket ground.
Just on fuel tax, the South Australian Premier has written the federal government to try and, with fuel prices going how they are, to try and, waive some or part of the tax. Will you make a similar move, or anything you're doing in this area?
Well, we're seeing fuel prices increase and fuel excise increases with that, and that goes towards providing support. Well, obviously, fuel prices increasing, the tax increases off the back of it. So that penalises people right across our state, right across the country. Cost of living and family budgets is a real issue right now, and will continue to be so, particularly as we see we move into a more inflationary environment. And we should be doing everything we can to make sure the focus isn't on our own budgets, but on family budgets across the state. And that's what we've done in New South Wales, and we'll continue to do so. And I'd welcome any move by the Commonwealth Government to reduce excise, which reduces the cost for families at this difficult time, because that's certainly what I see over the course of the year is a greater challenge when it comes to pressure on family budgets. And states and the Commonwealth have an important role to do in putting downward pressure on family budgets across our country.
Premier, just really quickly, I just wanted to ask, regarding development approvals in flood-prone areas, there's obviously been a lot of conversation around that.
Yep.
Can you confirm whether or not there's been any further progress with those talks, and will the government be continuing to approve developments for areas such as this, particularly as thousands more Sydney-siders move out towards the fringes?
Well, I think it's something that we need, and we've provided some statements in relation to that, and we're certainly looking at it going forward, and we need to. You can't just keep doing the same thing the same old way, ending up in the same situation and do nothing about it. So we need to have some fair income discussions and some work around how can we improve things going forward. We don't want to be in a situation where when we have these catastrophic events that we see the same damage. But having said that, there is perspective. There will always be events like this in our state and in our country. Unfortunately, in those events, there will be destruction of homes, lives will be lost. From a state and Commonwealth perspective, we've got to do everything we can to prevent these events from being as catastrophic as they can be, and we should be, you know, there is no better time to be having those discussions and looking at it than now.
Premier, a question about the cruise industry.
Yeah.
April 17, I believe, it's reliably passed on to me that you're thinking about maybe reopening.
How reliably?
So I'm glad. How is the government going with its consideration of that date? Could it bring us forward? The rest of society is living with COVID.
Yep.
This is an industry that has been crippled for a couple of years now, a significant contributor to the economy. Is it worth bringing that date forward? And why or why not?
Well, we've, from a New South Wales perspective, led the national industry work in getting the cruises back into the country as soon as possible. They need time to obviously ramp up and sell sell tickets. And from and from the advice that we received, the date that Biosecurity Act issue is resolved on that date, then cruises will be able to come back. We're the state that's led that work. I agree with you. It's made no sense to me that we can have a situation right now where people can fly overseas, jump on a cruise, and come home, yet we can't go cruising from our own country. So New South Wales has led the work alongside the Victorians, and my expectation is that will be the date. But that should you need dates to give confidence. What the industry has informed us as well is that it would probably start domestically and then ramp up internationally after that. But you can't just turn that tap on. I think that date was worked on in conjunction with the industry, and from my perspective, I want cruises back as quickly as possible, and not. I mean, it gets lost again that people say, well, you know, this is about, you know, from an economic perspective, there are so many people who rely on the cruise industry to provide for their families, and some of the areas that have been substantially hit, not just like we talk about impacts of floods and fires and the drought and the pandemic. The pandemic's gone for 2 years. Travel agent businesses have suffered greatly. These are small, in many cases, family businesses, and cruising is a crucial part of that. So I want, as Premier, cruising back as soon as possible, and we'll continue to work with the industry to do that.
Just on COVID more broadly,
Yeah.
Some independent schools are looking at maybe tightening restrictions in school
Yeah.
because of climbing cases. What's your response to that? And are there any conversations within government in terms of looking at maybe changing some settings more broadly at all?
Look, we've always said that we'll tailor our settings to the circumstances. My focus has always been looking at ICU presentations and hospitalisations. We do expect, as we head into winter, that it'll be a more challenging time, particularly as flu comes back in to the country, which we haven't seen for 2 years. So yes, we're always looking at those issues. We want to have a balanced response to it. But at the moment, the number one thing that we can do is get boosted. That's the number one thing. And sitting around 60%, I just continue to ask people, make that effort. Please continue to make that effort. That's the effort that's kept our people safe. But we always will, COVID is not going away anytime soon. It could be with us for years and years. There will be waves from time to time. And so the best thing we can do is be up to date with our vaccinations, and we will always tailor our settings to the circumstances in front of us. And if we see a need in relation to the pressure on our health system, then we will make those adjustments at that point in time.
But right now, the circumstance you don't think needs to.
Well, I haven't received any advice on that. Any advice to say that the situation right now requires a change.